Gustavo Petro is the new president of Colombia, and he's a leftist. So, by the way, let's stop and soak it in. It is rare that we get victories anywhere where you have a decent leftist in power. I mean, you could make an argument. I don't know if you can make as much of an argument today because I haven't followed him as closely as perhaps I should have. I don't see much international news on him, but AMLO was one who won in Mexico, is still in power in Mexico. And now you have Gustavo Petro in Colombia. Now, by the way, the U.S. does not like this one bit. It's always the right-wing leaders who are beholden to American corporate interests, and the U.S. feels threatened by any even slightly left-of-center leader. I mean, I guess you had Lula in Brazil, who may have been a slight exception to that, but this guy is the real deal. And so he went to the UN, he gave a speech, and he ain't holding back at all, dog. This is quite a speech. Let's watch.
40 años ha durado la guerra contra las drogas. Si no corregimos el rumbo y esta se...
You know what? I just realized that some people are listening to this on a podcast and not watching, so they can't read it. So I'm going to lower the volume massively, and I'm just going to read it for you so that everybody listening on the podcast can hear it. By the way, if you haven't yet, check out if you just want to listen to the podcast version of the show, that's now available. The full shows are now available on Spotify and Google Podcasts and iHeartRadio and all that stuff. So anyway, random shameless plug, but let me run that back in so I could read it to everybody. Okay.
40 años ha durado la guerra.
The war against drugs has been going on for 40 years. If we don't correct this path and it prolongs in another 40 years, the United States will see overdose deaths to 2.8 million. Young people due to fentanyl that is not produced in our Latin America. They will see millions of African Americans be imprisoned in private prisons. Imprisoned African Americans will become the business of prisons. 1 million Latin Americans will be murdered. They will fill with blood our waters and our green fields. They will see their dream of democracy die in America, as well as in Anglo-Saxons America. Democracy will die where it was born, in great Occidental European Athens. I got more for you.
La guerra contra las drogas ha fracasado. La lucha contra
the fight against the climate crisis has failed. Lethal drug use has increased from soft drugs to harder drugs. There has been a genocide on my continent. And in my country, millions of people have been sentenced to prison to hide their own social responsibility. They have blamed the jungle and its plants. They have filled speeches and policies with unreason. I love that word. I demand from here, from my wounded Latin America, end the irrational war on drugs. Reducing drug use does not require wars with guns. It needs us all to build a better society. This guy's the man, bro. It is the most straightforward, direct call to end the war on drugs I think I've ever seen from a leader of any country. And this guy is committed to it. This is one of the things that was an issue on the campaign trail. I do believe his opponent, who, by the way, was sort of like a Trump sycophant, his opponent also, I think, paid lip service to that. But his opponent also, by the way, praised Adolf Hitler. And it's funny because the media described Gustavo Petro's opponent as like a populist. It's like, dude, he's an authoritarian. He's a fascist. If you're praising Adolf Hitler, I think it's fair to call you a fascist. I don't think that's hyperbole. But who was the real populist? It was Gustavo Petro. He was the real populist. And what he's calling for here is a no-brainer. By the way, with everything that we see going on right now in the U.S., all the fear-mongering over a refugee crisis and an immigration crisis, what do you think would massively reduce a refugee crisis and immigration crisis? If you end the war on drugs. The war on drugs is one of the main things that has destroyed Mexico, Central America, and South America. I mean, Guatemala is more dangerous than Iraq was at the height of the Iraq War. This is something that we covered previously. You have gangs and cartels that are, roaming the streets, raping people, killing people. They have power. You effectively have various narco states set up in a variety of places. How do you fix that? Well, stop and think about it. If you end prohibition, you put the criminal gangs out of business. We know this. As a matter of fact, we saw what happened with prohibition in the United States of America, prohibition on alcohol. When you banned alcohol, it was pushed underground. The creation of it, the business of it was pushed underground to the black market. When it's on the black market, who becomes the business leaders? The mafia did. The mafia. It made the mafia incredibly strong, incredibly powerful. They had guns. They would have shootouts in the streets. By the way, also, if it's underground, you don't have regulation of the product. So every now and then, during alcohol prohibition, you would have what's called a bad batch of alcohol. Why? Because they would make it in bathtubs. And sometimes they messed up when they made it, and people would drink alcohol and then die immediately because it was poisoned batches. You don't get that if you have regulation of the marketplace. If it's off the black market, the products immediately become much safer. So what's the downside? You are destroying the criminal gangs, the mafias, the cartels. They can't compete with legitimate businesses. So you're putting them out of business, and you're massively reducing the crime rate and massively reducing overdose deaths. This is something Gustavo Petro knows. He understands this. He sees how the war on drugs has destroyed Colombia. He is pointing out the fact that we have more overdose deaths now. We saw this happen in the U.S. as soon as there was a crackdown on the pain pills, which, by the way, stemmed from a good place. People were worried, oh my God, these opiates and opioids these pills are everywhere and people are dying and they're overdosing and that's not okay, that's terrible, we got to do something about this. So we cracked down on the pills. Now we swung the pendulum too far in the other direction. What happened? Well, a lot of the people who were addicted to the pills still wanted to get their fix, so they went to the black market and started getting heroin. And you know what? Some of that heroin were bad batches, and it was mixed with fentanyl, which is much more powerful. And people would die from doing what they thought was their normal dose of heroin. There's speculation that this is what happened to Philip Seymour Hoffman, famous U.S. actor. Apparently he was a heroin addict. He was doing heroin. It was laced with fentanyl. He's dead now. Maybe Michael K. Williams as well. I mean, this is something... Overdoses have gone up after the pain pill crackdown because of fentanyl. So again, how do you fix this? How do you control this? The answer is not a literal war and criminalization. And by the way, when you do a literal war and criminalization, guess what? More people die. Because now you're fighting a war in the streets of many countries and preventing them from being peaceful and safe and having law and order. If you legalize, tax, and regulate, or at the very least decriminalize, tax, and regulate, you're in a much better position. Much better position. And so you got to stop it, man. You have to stop the war on drugs. It is an absolute no-brainer. And now we have a world leader at the UN screaming it from the top of his lungs. This is irrational, he says. Policies are being set with, quote, unreason. Again, I love that word. I got to start using that more. So Gustavo Petro, man, how long until they try to overthrow him? How long until they try to coup him? I wish I was joking, but I don't think I am. Similar thing happened with Evo Morales. Obviously Maduro, who, by the way, I think is way worse than a guy like Gustavo Petro. But we all know Trump administration was effectively trying to coup him. They pretended like Juan Guaido was president, even though he wasn't. Doesn't matter what you think of Maduro. The dude is the leader of Venezuela, right? They just pretended like he wasn't, tried to coup him. How long until... Because Colombia has been a reliable ally of the U.S., but now with a leftist leader, I'm sure the U.S. is sort of souring on him. So, we'll see, man, but I don't think there's any other way to say it. This dude is based. This dude is based. This dude is a real leader. And let's just hope other world leaders listen to him and follow his lead, because he's spot on here. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal Kyle and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.